Hey, John, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Just enjoying the weather out here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Probably going to go for a walk later and ruminate on some ideas. How's everything with you, Scott?
Nice, man. Things are amazing. I am very excited for this conversation. And I think for me, the reason why I wanted to have you on the show is I think, A, what you're doing with DMT Quest is amazing and so needed for humanity. But I also, when I heard more about your personal story, it resonated a lot of the, call them paranormal or unique, atypical experiences I've had on my own journey. And I have not honestly encountered a lot of people that have experienced this stuff. And so I was excited to just learn from someone else on their journey. But maybe to kind of start things off, for the people that are not as familiar with DMT, maybe you could just describe what that is as a starting point.
Yeah, sure. DMT is a psychedelic compound similar to things like psilocybin or LSD. When you smoke it or vaporize it, it lasts about 10 minutes, and it's described as a very intense phenomenon in which people describe complex geometric patterns, even interaction with beings of sorts. Rick Strassman wrote about this compound DMT in his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, that he put out in the year 2000. He's a medical doctor that actually studied the effects of DMT at the University of New Mexico in the early 1990s. And he found that it was a very short-acting compound that lasted only about 10 minutes. But what was interesting is that it seemed as though it could take somebody from a very skeptical or even atheistic perspective and open them up to the possibility that there's something more to life than merely the physical world. DMT is also utilized in the ayahuasca brew that's been pretty popularized over the past couple of decades or so. Shamans used ayahuasca in their ceremonies down in the South American jungle and various other parts of the world. They combine two different plants, one that contains DMT and another one that contains the ayahuasca vine, which allows for the DMT experience to last for hours at a time. And people go on these journeys, and a lot of people describe antidepressant effects, anti-anxiety effects, and sometimes people even describe a miraculous physical sort of healing. So it's ayahuasca's pretty much taken the world by storm, and it's I believe that there's a lot of therapeutic beneficial aspects to the brew if utilized in the proper setting. So, yeah, that's just a general overview of DMT and the different types of ways it's ingested and the effects.
What I find so interesting about DMT that I feel like most people don't necessarily know unless they're pretty deep into this world is that it is actually natively created in mammals. And it already exists in our system. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you have learned there.
Yeah, it's interesting in the sense that it's actually been known, I believe, since the late 1960s that DMT is naturally occurring in the human body. And every mammal tested for it thus far, DMT exists, and even in thousands of plants. So it's almost like a ubiquitous molecule that's found throughout the natural world. What it's actually doing in the human system, this powerful psychedelic compound, is still a mystery. Most of the studies that have taken place in terms of understanding DMT in terms of neurology have taken place in rats or mice. And a lot of neuroscience, modern neuroscience, is modeled after rats and mice, being that we can probe them in a little bit more invasive way than we can humans, obviously. But yeah, DMT exists within humans. The big question is why? Why do we produce such an interesting, powerful psychedelic within us? In the year 2013, it was found that DMT seems to be produced around the pineal gland site. And there was a lot of memes and a lot of discussion about the pineal gland as being the source of DMT, not only in the rat brain, but also the human brain, being that the pineal gland has been, I guess, in the more esoteric texts and maybe even somewhat religious texts have been talked about the seat of the soul or things of that nature. However, in 2019, Dr. John Dean out of the University of Michigan published a study that really changed the perspective of DMT in the mammalian brain altogether, being that he found that DMT was actually produced at similar levels to serotonin and dopamine, which was groundbreaking because for the longest time, it was always hypothesized that DMT was only produced during like a near-death experience, and then you'd have a surge of it maybe releasing from the pineal gland. But he saw that in live waking mammals that DMT seems to be produced all the time at similar levels to serotonin and dopamine. So we kind of had this psychedelic compound possibly modulating our everyday waking reality. And that even adds bigger questions, right? So you get some answers which lead to even just bigger questions about what is reality and why do we produce DMT at such interesting levels all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating, and I think there's a couple points here that I think are very interesting to illuminate. I know a lot of people that have just nervousness around something like ayahuasca. What they perhaps don't know is that the psychoactive compound that is really creates a lot of the experience is actually already inside them, which is so amazing. And in fact, there's a lot of it in us all the time. And so it's so interesting. And maybe we can segue into DMT Quest and the mission and vision for that company, or organization rather.
Yeah, sure. So I guess to give some background as to how DMT Quest came about, I can talk about, I guess, my experience because
please.
I guess I could say that I was a very skeptical, atheistic person. I grew up Catholic or Christian. I don't really know how to describe it, but basically my parents had me go to
went to church on Sundays.
Yeah, church on, but not even every Sunday. It was like very sporadic, and I ended up spending some time in Catholic school for a year or two and all that. But I never really, when you get deeper into education, high school, college, then that's never really intertwined. So you tend to lean more towards what we would consider logic and reason and science. And so I never really was interested in even psychedelics or anything of that nature. And I spent about 10 years working in the biotech industry from the age of about 19 all the way up to 29. So I was in college while I was working in biotech. After that, I transitioned into sports marketing. I got a bug for that. And then when I was 32, I had a pulmonary embolism while I was living in New York in the sports marketing industry. And I was just basically having like my health was degrading a lot. I was just not living a very healthy lifestyle. My idea of being healthy was grabbing a Gatorade and eating a power bar, which is kind of
you
silly.
and 80% of the rest of Americans, man. No shame.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so silly looking back. But anyhow, it feels as though my health just was degrading to the point it really caught up to me. And, I didn't have really a near-death experience in the sense of visionary, but afterwards I realized how severe, serious a pulmonary embolism could be. Anyhow, long story short, I was still having health issues in terms of bad sleep, unable to digest food properly. So 33 years old, I moved back to the Bay Area from New York, and I was desperate because the doctors couldn't really figure out what was going on with me. Looking back, it was just a holistic situation. And I got desperate. So what ended up happening is I ended up doing a deep gastrointestinal purge, like a cleansing of the body. And in doing so, it induced a mystical experience, like a healing. First off, it was almost like an instantaneous healing that took place within a day. And then secondly, the after effects.
Can we go a little bit deeper here? Just so like what specifically was like the cleanse? Like, did you not eat? Did you only eat certain things? What did that look like?
Nah, I mean, just to put it blunt, I took some substances to cause like a massive shitting. So basically, like I just released a bunch of stuff from my gut. And because I was having like digestive issues for years. So, I was taking Prilosec and Mylanta like on a regular for years. So it's like, my GI tract was just completely not doing well. So it was just basically a big purge. We were just shitting for like all day. And that within itself, induced the healing as well as the mystical type experience. And so basically, I guess what I can say is that following the purge, I felt like a sense of electricity flowing through my body from like my tailbone all the way up to the top of my head, out my hands. It was like I had been plugged into an electric socket. It was very strange feeling, but at the same time, I felt great because I hadn't felt that alive in so many years. Even I could almost say that I felt completely inhabiting my body almost for the first time in my life, which was very strange because obviously I remember growing up and all the memories I had, but it was just a very distinct sensation of like, wow, I feel like a sense of presence. And so I felt the sensation of electricity, but my girlfriend at the time, she came home after this purge and she had been diagnosed with lupus. So she had some issues of herself. And I noticed that when I first went to hug her, that there was almost like a siphoning sensation of electricity from my body into hers. And she felt like instantaneously pain-free. So normally she's describing like a lot of lupus aches and pains, and basically like there was a transference of what seemed like electricity between two people, which I found very strange because I had never experienced that before. And that led me down the path of like trying to figure out what is going on here, because I don't really understand any of this. I had not read anything about mysticism or psychedelics or anything of that nature.
Totally.
I also found a very strange interaction with electric devices. Like the phone felt very draining of energy, as well as the television felt very disruptive. When I would go outside, I could feel like electric wires. It was just like really kind of disrupting my perspective of reality in terms of interaction, because it's not like I was seeing things or necessarily hearing things. I was just feeling fields that were disturbing me. A few days after that purge, it was at night, and I had the sense, I had the intuition. I don't know if your feet get cold at night, but because the electricity was flowing at such a distinct sensation, I felt as though, I had the intuition of maybe just visualizing my foot getting warm. So both my feet are cold. I visualized my right foot getting warm. Basically visualizing electricity going down to that foot. And within a second, it felt hot. And I grab it with both of my hands, and it feels warm, while the left foot still feels cold. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting, because it's not like a general body sensation. It was like a very targeted sort of effect. So I do the same thing with the left foot, and within a second, the same thing happened. So I was like, wow, this is really intriguing. But mind you, I'd never heard about Wim Hof method or autonomic nervous system control or nothing like that. I was just like playing with this because I was, I don't know why. I just had these intuitions. And then the next day, we're at the dinner table after dinner with my girlfriend at the time. And I had the intuition of maybe just visualizing through the air into her head, that maybe like there could be a connection of sorts between two people. I don't know why. I'd never been interested or even read about telepathy or healing or anything like that. I just had a distinct intuition to try. So I hadn't tried, just did the same exact visualization that had the effect within my body. And I was just visualized into her head. And basically like in about, I would say 3 to 5 seconds, when the visualization got very vivid, her head like jolted back. And she was like, whoa, what was that? And at that moment, I knew that it wasn't just a nervous system thing, that whatever this visualization, electricity, electromagnetism, however you want to describe it, it could actually go through the air, whatever the air is, right? It could actually go past the physical body. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. But at this point, not surprising, because I'm experiencing all this.
What else can I do?
Yeah, what else is there? So, next thought was like, maybe that's how telepathic transference of information could work. So I was like, all right, I told her at that point what I did. And she was like, okay, like she was a mystic. I mean, she came from a lineage of mystics. So none of this was like freaking her out. She was like, finally,
you guys were destined to telepath together.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, she comes from that lineage. So basically, I was like, let me take the next step and see if information can actually go over the visualization. And yeah, it worked like a charm. Like, it was like 3 or 4 times in a row. It was just very random. It was like, it wasn't like it's going to be 1 or 2 black or white. You know how a lot of those telepathy experiments and studies are like Dean Radin or at the Pear Lab at Princeton. They've done a lot of those telepathy studies, which are very much like statistical based. This was like very much like, I'm going to just pick something, 1 out of a million things, and I'm going to like transfer it via visualization into you. And yeah, she got it like correct. Yeah, like 3-4 times in a row. And
so you were the one sending her information, or she was sending you information, or both?
At first it was just me, and then after a while it was her. And then I realized you could be both sender and receiver. Yeah.
That's awesome. I can't, I was going to say, I can't help but share my own first telepathic experience. It was on my second ayahuasca retreat, and similar to you, and I now have a greater understanding of why this might be, with greater understanding of consciousness and its nature. But I had that intuition to visualize or think of someone in my life. And when I thought of that person, thought of my mom, I was like thinking of my executive coach, just random people. They were giving me information. And I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. Like, it's like I'm getting a download of information in the exact way that they would talk. And this information I later verified was true. But at the time I was thinking, wow, this seems like this would be right. And I was just more or less asking them questions. And then it occurred to me why don't I try this in the room? And I looked at my ayahuasca shaman and said, can you hear me? And she was looking in the other direction, and she turned to me and started nodding her head and basically mouthed to me like, yeah, I can hear you. And I'm like, what am I saying? And we had this whole conversation, and it occurred to me that, well, if we all really are one unified consciousness and this whole separation is an illusion, but of course we could have the ability to communicate sublingually. And that was really just a potentiality that was never considered, developed, or, who knows, maybe didn't have the capacity at the lower normal waking state of consciousness. And so I have played around with it a lot since, and, we don't have to talk about that, or we can, but man, it's just so cool to hear somebody else who's had that experience and revelation around just the truth about the artificial limitations of what is possible for a human.
Yeah, trust me, it was it blew my own mind just kind of navigating that whole thing. But what really solidified it for me too was being able to replicate this with skeptics. Being able to teach others how to do this, be understanding, or actually believing that I have an understanding as to the mechanisms that would promote something like this to occur. I work with people that navigate altered states of consciousness, like trance states of consciousness. It just made me realize that it's basically getting outside of our baseline consciousness, which is very left brain, logical, rational thought process. So you kind of got to find a way to quiet that aspect of the brain down, and get into your trance-like state, whether it be breath work, hypnotic states, or meditative states. And all these sort of strange abilities seem to come about. That includes things like autonomic nervous system control, something that Wim Hof proved unequivocally in a 2014 Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences study. Most importantly, it wasn't just Wim; it was the ability that a dozen people could learn his technique within a few days and replicate what he was able to do. So it showed that there's like mechanics to this. It's not necessarily just magical, even though it can be magical. It seems as though there's definitive mechanics to this. So back to like the whole DMT quest and how it all got started was the mystical experience continued, things like that. I was able to, mind you, this experience lasted for about 12 weeks where I was like really in the state of like deep electric sort of sensation. So it allowed me time to maneuver and explore a bit and really kind of push the envelope in certain ways. And so basically after that, I started to try to find a way to communicate this with others. And what happened was that because I'd worked in biotech for a while, I'd kept in touch with some of the people from that industry. And I found that there was like a difficulty in terms of communication with these people because they were skeptics and, they're science-minded, and which kind of was strange to me because I always felt that people within the sciences would be the most interested in something like this. But it wasn't the case. It was almost the opposite. So long story short, on my sister's wedding, I think this was in 2014 or 2015, I had a cousin of mine who was in medical school, and, I was attempting to tell him about the experience, and he kind of just brushed me off and he was like, go look up DMT. So I didn't even heard about DMT until that moment in time. And so I looked it up and I was like, whoa, there's this thing called the spirit molecule, and wow, it exists in humans. That's really strange, but it's also really interesting. So, read Strassman's book, read all the literature out there, and tried to find a way to present mystical states that coincided with potential DMT upregulation. So what happened is that I ended up starting an anonymous blog to write about this because I knew that there was something to it. I knew that the mystical state was not just relegated to me. That was really one of the most mind-blowing things is that looking at the literature, even in the early 1900s, there was legitimate scientists that were studying all sorts of things, right? Even the EEG, right? That was electroencephalography. That was a device that neuroscientists used up until today at all the top universities, which was initially created to study telepathy. This was in like 1920.
No kidding. That is why the EEG was created?
Yeah, a fellow named Hans Berger. He had like an accident where I think he fell off a horse, and like his sister could sense that he was in some sort of danger, and he couldn't like stop thinking about the fact that there was some definitive communication between the two at a distance, and he had to create a device to measure this phenomena. So he developed the EEG in the 1920s, and it's still used to this day. And a lot of people don't know about its origins. But so anyhow, basically, I got deep into the research, independent research, and writing about the mechanisms of all altered states, all strange phenomena, supernormal abilities, tying that in with biological changes, and then tying those biological changes with potential endogenous DMT upregulation. And what happened is that over time, I was just writing anonymously, not expecting much, just kind of to sort my own thoughts out about the whole situation. Yeah. And then Dennis McKenna got a hold of it, and he really liked it. So we started interacting a bit, and then he invited me to he introduced me to Anton Bilton. Anton Bilton started the Tyringham Initiative. He's based out of the UK. That basically has been a gathering of the top researchers in the field of psychedelics, as well as, I guess, supernormal, paranormal states. And I got invited to go to those private symposiums since 2017. So I basically compiled my blog post into a book called Questions for the Lion Tamer. Anton read it. I ended up putting out 2 books about it. And, the thing that I noticed was that there simply wasn't enough research going into endogenous DMT research. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So the one thing I want to add in was that back to the biotech thing and my cousin talking to me about DMT. So what I saw that there was a real interesting point was that when I started to introduce the concept of DMT upregulation with the mystical states and the supernormal abilities, that's when I started to get the traction with the people in the biotech industry. They were much more receptive to the supernormal being something real when it was intertwined with something that was undeniable, like a molecule. So that's where I need to make that key connection. So, but anyhow, long story short.
And I guess, I was going to ask, did you discover that upregulation, or were you just amplifying the research and data that existed that perhaps large populations did not know about?
Yeah, I was tying it in with, so basically there's been a lot of data regarding brainwave changes, EEG, and altered states of consciousness. So that's nothing new. What I guess my contribution to that was tying in with the notion that this distinct changes that seem to take place during virtually the vast majority of all altered states of consciousness, whether it be near-death experience, meditation, breath work, sensory deprivation, hypnotic states, is that there seems to be a fluctuation in the gamma wave frequency, which is considered the faster frequency, almost like a peak performance type frequency. And tying that in with the data regarding psychedelics, DMT, ayahuasca, and they also upregulated this same frequency of the gamma wave. So I basically, what I did in the writings was tie in the possibility that there was endogenous DMT upregulation coinciding with this change in the gamma wave, which was, the change in our perception, the change in our electrophysiology, and subsequently the change in potential abilities as well. So it's basically like creating a very straightforward framework that there's changes that take place biologically, systemically. And for supernormal abilities to exist, it would make sense that there would have to be distinct changes. It's not like you're going to be walking down the street and able to access abilities with a snap of the fingers. It would make sense that there would have to be a distinct shift in measurable, objectively measurable biological correlates that could coincide with a change in abilities. So that's really, I guess, if somebody were to describe my contributions to the space, that would be it.
That's amazing. And, I got to ask, I have so many questions for you, but regarding the Kundalini stuff, has there been, because that's something that has happened to me about 4 years ago. I'm sure you've read Gopi Krishna's work about his Kundalini awakening. He kind of made it popularized in India, and his whole life mission was to try to get science to study the nervous system impact on Kundalini symptomology. Has there been any research on how or what changes when that energy, that latent energy inside of us awakens?
Let me specifically regarding Kundalini. I haven't, the funny thing is we both have had it, and I haven't really delved into specific Kundalini research. I've basically looked at broad range of all altered states, but yeah, I think there would be definitive changes in terms of the brainwaves and things like that. Well,
maybe what a better question would be then is what what across all altered states, like what are the most prominent features or changes that occur when someone develops special abilities?
It seems as though there's this thing called cross-frequency coupling, where you have an increase in your slow waves that seem to coincide with things like deep relaxative experiences, like meditation. It's almost like somebody can sleepwalk and hyperfocus at the same time. So the slower waves in the brain coincide with the relaxative states, while the faster waves like a beta or a gamma coincide with like a hyper focus. So what I've seen and what I've experienced and what I've taught is that the supernormal aspects of life can come about when you are in these states of deep sedation and hyper focus at the same time, which almost sound counter, right? Normally, people only understand what it feels like to be hyper focused on work, like really looking deeply at something in a very intense way, or being like extremely sedated to the point of almost sleeping, right? Most people have never really navigated this space of being deeply relaxed and hyper focused at the same time. And that's really what I've noticed in terms of these changes that take place in a person. So it's almost like a theta gamma or like a delta gamma increase in people. And that's really what I've seen across the board.
Yeah, I think one interesting example that maybe people can think of is if they've ever been in a hypnagogic state, which is maybe not hyper focused, but it's that kind of in between state of when you fall asleep, but you're still awake and you're relaxed. And, you know, it's funny. Sometimes my girlfriend says I'm snoring, but I'm sitting there in my own brain thinking that I'm actually awake. And, you know, it's unclear, right? It's this really kind of gray area, which is fascinating. But that's really cool. And it makes sense that things like meditation and people that have pursued that earnestly and really developed that skill set or groove in their neurobiology to be quite calm and focused are where we see across history people experiencing, you know, these special abilities.
Yeah, I mean, even things as I don't know, nascent is the right word, but like Thomas Edison and a lot of inventors of their time would utilize hypnagogic states to come up with solutions to issues that they couldn't during their active waking state. And I think that's something to be taken into account when we're talking about how information can come about, how ideas can come about. You know, I recently put out a video presentation regarding DMT in education, because it seems as though children are navigating this state constantly. And yeah, there's actually evidence that, you know, the chemistry table, the periodic table was visualized in a dream. The benzene ring was visualized in a dream. Paul McCartney came up with the song Yesterday in a dream. It's these altered states have very strange, they open us up to abilities and information and insights that it's hard to wrap your head around when you're in an active waking mindset. So I think there needs to be a way going forward to intertwine this with the way we learn, education, and I think the way that we develop on a personal level. So that's really, to me, what DMT Quest is about. It's about funding endogenous DMT research, funding altered states, peak performance, supernormal abilities, really pushing that, pushing it to the next level, the level it needs to go to. High utility things like reversing neurodegenerative conditions. That's a big focus of mine these days, because I do feel as though the mechanisms are there in terms of addressing things like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's. So just basically all overall scope in terms of just what we can do and how we can heal ourselves, both physically, emotionally, and every which way.
It's amazing, man. I absolutely love it. And I think a lot about, what you said, because, you know, on a personal level, I have a daily practice of going into deep meditative states and posing questions and getting information that's far superior than anything that I could come up with in my kind of alert conscious mind. And it's almost like a superpower. I mean, it is a superpower. And I keep thinking about this idea that it feels like when we're talking about special abilities, they can either emerge naturally, which often they do when people, spend years meditating or different things like that. The cities is what they're often called in some parts of the world, or they can be developed through intentional skill development and teaching. And it seems to me like there's certainly some of it going on, but there's like a massive opportunity for someone to formalize training and education at scale for these things. But I guess kind of what needs to come first, and back to the DMT quest, is some type of legitimizing factor for, the left brain scientific world that we live in, to actually acknowledge that this is a real thing. And it's not just a bunch of woo-woo people making shit up, which it feels like often is the reception that I get when I talk about some of the things I go through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really, I guess, communicative bridges are so key, right? Because it's so easy to have cognitive dissonance with so many things, right? The world is so polarized these days about so many things. So it's really about where can we have a starting point between the mystics, the believers, the knowers, the skeptics, the atheists, and the scientists, right? Where can we have a connecting hub? And I feel as though DMT is a great starting point. I don't think it's going to stay there forever. It's going to always be attached, I guess biochemically to a certain extent, but there's scientists doing great work. There's a fellow named Joachim Kepler out of Germany who's really tying in the notion that our brain's consciousness is almost like a field of sorts, like an electromagnetic field. And then that electromagnetic field is interacting with the 0 point field, which is a background field that is basically everywhere all the time. And it's a field that contains all our experiences, our memories, and it's our oscillations that are interacting with the field that allow us to access information in such a fluid manner that, we're looking at it as if it's taking place specifically in the brain, but it could potentially be taking place at a level of a less physical field of sorts. So there's a lot of emerging work going out there these days by physicists and futuristic thinkers that are still, but the thing about Kepler is that he's actually tying it in with brain waves, with endogenous compounds and neurotransmitters. So yeah, I think that communicative theories that can really help merge the worlds are key. Science is obviously very important, but communication is just as important in my opinion. And then also the promotion of these significant research endeavors. And that's why I started the DMT Quest nonprofit, but also I'm focused on making films like documentaries about the research so we can promote them to a layman's perspective, a wider audience, so people can understand the importance of it and ultimately the societal impact that will come from that.
It makes total sense. As someone who has been in the startup world, it's not just about having a great product, it's about bringing it to market, which I feel like is often the case with a lot of this research and things that are coming out. And one of the things that I thought is so fascinating after watching the DMT Quest is it seems like despite all of these people having all of these profound experiences, that it is an underfunded body of research and that we don't have a ton of people looking at this. And I just find that to be incredibly perplexing. And I'd love to get your thoughts on why.
Yeah, it is really perplexing. There's a lot of theories as to why it hasn't been funded. One, I suspect, at least in terms of government funding and the lack of government funding, is the fact that in the 70s, there was a lot of endogenous DMT research for its time, at least. and it seemed as though there was a lot of inconclusive research. They wanted to tie it in with things like schizophrenia and psychiatric disorders, but they saw that there was varying levels of. So the interesting thing is that there's actually 3 types of DMT that's produced in the body. There's the regular DMT, 5-MeO DMT, and bufotenine, which is I think 5-hydroxy DMT, and specifically 5-hydroxy DMT. They saw that there was elevated levels in people with schizophrenia, but there was also other research indicating that it was in normal people that didn't have psychiatric disorders. So what I'm positing is that because there was a lot of studies that were inconclusive, some studies saying one thing, some studies saying others, there wasn't a definitive pathway to develop future research, and that's where it kind of died off. And at this point, it doesn't seem as though the government, NIH, is that interested in endogenous DMT research, so it's going to have to come from private sources. I think that also a lot of people, like the general public, even people in the psychedelic space, are not really that well versed on how research gets funded. They just probably believe that if something is interesting or important, it'll magically get funded. And that's not how things work. If it's not getting funded by the NIH, then there has to be private funding to go ahead and support the research. So, yeah, I think that's why it's been lacking. So my main mission is to make a lot of noise and make people aware that this is an underfunded field and the implications of what, if this field was funded, the implications for humanity, over the next decades or so is definitely world changing. If we play our cards right and go past just the specific DMT research, it's going to be all encompassing. And that's really what I'm excited about.
Yeah, it seems like the DMT research can act as a linchpin to really open up the floodgates for lots of these other understudied things that correlate to exactly what you said, not just greater human capabilities, but healing, reversing lots of these things that chronically, and what we're doing currently isn't working so well in a lot of the field of medicine. And so I think it's important that we explore some of these more profound things.
Yeah. And even getting a greater perspective of what the whole, human experience is, right? And the process of transitioning out, the dying process, if you want to say it like that. For most people, it's like something you don't want to talk about. Like it's too scary, or it's like you can't navigate it. You never know what's on the other side. But, there's a lot of interesting research taking place right now. Extended state DMTs taking place in Imperial College. Obviously, people having the ayahuasca experience, the vine of the dead, all the near-death experiences that have been described, all throughout the continent or throughout the world, really. And I think that's one of the interesting projects probably that's going to take place over the next coming decades is mapping out the other side. It sounds so crazy and far-fetched, but I believe that's in the cards, right? I don't know if you've seen any old maps from like the 1700s or 1800s of the world, but it might blow some people's minds to know that there were very accurate maps of the world before airplanes, before satellites. Humans had the ability to triangulate and create, these mind-blowing maps that nobody would think that, they could ever do without those technologies of today. But I feel as though we're on the course to do that with something like the afterlife, or that, that space that we go to once the body, gives out. I think these are questions that, our ancestors have been looking at really deeply for thousands of years. Modern society has gotten away from that, but I think we're going to go back to that as well.
Yeah, I can't help but think of the Egyptians and how they had a very formal teaching about what happened after you died. And it was depicted everywhere. And, death in our society is taboo. And it's funny when you listen to a lot of great teachers and thinkers. I'm thinking of, Ram Dass or Alan Watts. They talk about the notion that death is the end of it is the biggest myth there is. And I certainly have a similar belief. I think, we need to start to consider it as a transition, not an end. And maybe if we do that, we can live more peacefully and harmoniously and not from such a place of fear. And so if DMT can help us realize that, man, what an amazing different world that we will live in.
Absolutely. That's the game plan. At least that's the big picture vision, to hit all the notes. There's so many notes. And, I love connecting with guys like you, people that are in the space of merging the worlds, because I love my hippies, man. I love the light workers and the mystics, but we also need entrepreneurs and people that can really help lift this whole thing to the next level. So for me, I don't really look at DMT Quest as my thing. I look at it as the world's thing. And whoever wants to get involved and feels like they can add on to it, like, I'm completely open to working with anybody and everybody who's, operating from the right space and wants to, take a society to the next level. So I'm just excited.
I love it, man. I want to like run through a wall right now. I'm fired up.
Right on.
Well, John, on that note, like, for the listeners, for anybody that, you get on their radar, how can we help you? How can they help this project? What is the best way to get in touch and start to contribute?
Yeah, the easiest way to get in touch is just to email me at jchavez, JCHAVEZ @dmtquest.org. But I mean, everybody out there that's going to be listening to this has their general vein of passion, right? Some people are going to be more drawn to maybe meditation benefits. Some people are going to be drawn to reversing neurodegenerative conditions. Some people are going to be very mesmerized by the afterlife. I cover all of it. So it's like, if you want to get involved, just email me and then we can have a discussion. Because I always want to, just have some sort of discourse rather than just, hey, give me money, right? Because we are trying to get our scientific researchers funded. John Dean out of the University of San Diego, Jima Borjigan at University of Michigan. They do need to get funded. Don't get me wrong. But I do like to create some sort of discourse rather than just, having my hand out saying, hey, we need to get this stuff funded. So, yeah, just email me and we can get a discussion going and hopefully, create a network of people that really want to, change the whole situation.
Let's do it. That's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today, John. Your story is inspiring, and the change you want to see in the world is a change that I know myself and many others want to see in the world. And so we're just thrilled to learn from you today. And for everybody who's listening, if you want more information, check out the show notes on my Substack, scottbritton.substack.com. And there you'll find all the links to John's stuff, his awesome documentary, and other things that we talked about in this episode. Well, John, thanks again, man. That was awesome. And I guess we'll see everybody on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Scott. Looking forward to having more conversation with you and learning about your experience and connecting with all your listeners as well.